those, that melody, they just wash right over us. And it puts us at peace. It calms our spirit. It takes those things that we've encountered throughout this week and our lips. Father, it's you. Of your Welcome back to Gary and Linda, my main supplier for In-N-Out Burger. You guys were out in California. They were out traveling. And if you didn't bring me back a number able to do that. Don't. On your hands. Anything? These are not expired. Oh, sorry. Talk to me. Flying the future culture right. I wonder what it must have been like to Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus. To raise Jesus, a little boy that loves to go and catch frogs and stick them in his pocket. A little boy that finds a stick and picks it up. A little boy that finds little threads and little balls of wood. Or has a little piece of something that he wants to eat and save. Way out in the sticks. It's way out in the boonies. It's like 80 miles away. And they didn't have, major stores or homes or things like that. They scraped together anything they could to make a house, make a home. Whether that was rock or mud or branches or trees or things like that. Jesus, I wonder what it was like for Jesus as a little boy to go running out into the fields, out into the trees, and climbing trees, and hearing the little squeal of kids running, and just, they just... Everything a little boy would do. Huh. And they were righteous, not because of anything they had done. God declared them righteous. And then it says that they were devout. What does that mean? It means they obeyed the word of the Lord. What God said to do, what they did. And Mary and Joseph, they're 14, 15 years old, raising this little newborn baby. So that means, if you kind of put the timetable together, by the time Jesus turns 12, his parents are probably somewhere in their mid-20s. Somewhere in there. Young parents. Oh, and here's the other thing I was thinking about too. He had brothers and sisters. We know that a little bit later, but little Jesus, I wonder how soon Mary and Joseph started on their family with Jesus and then their other little brothers and sisters. And I wonder how many kids did Mary and Joseph have? I know we know James, okay, half-brother of Jesus. But I know they had others. The way I know that is because later in the gospel it talks about how Jesus was and you're peering out behind. I wonder if that was like what you, or if you ever got afraid. Don't ever forget that this was exactly like Jesus, normal, healthy, growing up in a world that was filled with anger and violence, Romans and disease and soldiers and theft and robbers and highwaymen and all these different things that would go on. And he heard all the chit-chat that was going on around in town. I'm sure of it. But he grew up in a little town called Nazareth. You know what? Let's kind of pick up the story here a little bit. It says his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the Feast of Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem according to the custom of the feast. And when they had finished the days, as they returned, the boy Jesus lingered behind in Jerusalem. And Joseph and his mother, they didn't know about it. You know that story, don't you? You've heard that before. You know, one of the things that you learn from Mary and Joseph, I think, number one, take a look up on the slide. Here it is. How to help your child so that they know who they really are. Next slide. Put God first above your family. Let me say that again. Put God first. First. Above everybody, above everything in your life. You put God first. You know, Mary and Joseph were like that. It says that they went up to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. And they did that year after year after year after year after year. Now, I told you last week a little bit what it was like. Can you imagine what it must have been like for Mary and Joseph traveling 80 miles on foot, 80 miles to get to Jerusalem to worship at Passover? You know, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, going to Passover was, I mean, it's like there's 3 holidays that the Jews would celebrate. It's kind of like with us with Christmas and Easter. I mean, how many of you want to have your family home, you know, for Christmas? And man, we'll go across the country. We'll spend hours on a plane just to get someplace where we want to be for a holiday. And one of the things that we do at a holiday is we what? Celebrate what God has done. And so we go to church together, and we want our family to be with us at church. And well, Jesus, can you imagine little Jesus? Little Jesus, he's traveling with his mom and dad for 4 days. Maybe 5. 4 days. Just to get to Jerusalem. Now, I was kind of figuring out the math a little bit for some of you that like math. I figure, well, if you can walk like 20, maybe 25 miles, that's a good walk, right? That might take you quite a bit of the day to walk that. That wouldn't be easy. So if Jerusalem is 80 miles away from Nazareth, it would take you 4, maybe 5 days to get to Jerusalem. 20 miles a day. Here's what I know about kids. You can never go as fast as you want to. You have a child. See, they got little legs. Got little legs. In fact, you guys come up here for a second? Bring your son? Yeah. Come here, buddy. You didn't know you were going to be an illustration this morning, did you? Everybody say hi, trailer. All right, come on up here, you guys. All right. Come on, right here. Right there. All right. How old are you? 5 years old. Nice. And you just had a birthday not too long ago, didn't you? Cool. All right. Now, I got a question for you. How tall is he? Mom, what do you mean you don't know? Just kidding. Just kidding. Are you growing? You're getting big, aren't you? Are you driving yet? Do you want to drive? What? Oh, okay. Well, she'll let you borrow the car sometime. Okay? Now, I want you to see something here. Trailer. Look at how tall he is. Now, he's 5. Now, can you imagine Trailer 3 years old, 2 years old, and you're walking from here to, what's 80 miles from here? Miami? No, not that far. I don't know, whatever 80 miles is. Can you imagine walking 80 miles with a little 3-year-old? Can you imagine how many times they would have to stop and go to the bathroom? And it's like, oh my goodness, you know, and it's like those little legs, they're getting bigger. Now you can walk, you can run now, can't you? Yeah, you run fast? Yeah, I bet you do. I bet you do. And that's the thing. When they start to get a little bit older, they start to get their own mind. Yeah, exactly. You know exactly. And so they start running. And they start walking. Now, can he walk as fast as you?
Maybe. Well,
Okay. Taylor, can you keep up with your mom? Yeah. What? You can't keep up with him. Here's the thing. Baby Jesus is growing up. And he's getting big. But his parents, every year, went to Jerusalem. Now that's 80 miles one way. Now that's walking with him 80 miles. How tired would he get? And if he doesn't really want to do this, you'd have to hold him, and then you're carrying him in, and then you're trying to help him. Would he get a little cranky? He'd get a little cranky. Would he need some food, need some rest, sleep, things like that? You get the idea? Get the idea? But you know what? The mom and dad, Mary and Joseph, they took their son every year to church. Every year, 80 miles they would have to walk. All right, so now think about this before I get done. You stay right there. For 4 days, they're traveling. To celebrate the Passover, they would what? They would celebrate Passover for 1 day. And then they would celebrate what was called the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. So what they did was they took 2 major events that God said, I want you to worship me on that. And what I want you to do is I want you to come and to worship who I am and what I've done for you. You remember Passover. God delivered his people from Egypt. And the angel of the Lord passed over Egypt, and the firstborn all died. They didn't have the blood on the lintel and on the doorposts. You remember they would celebrate Passover, and they would take the lamb, and they would have it inside the house, and they would do all those kind of things. Well, every year, they would go to Jerusalem. They'd have to get a place to stay. They'd be with family, friends, somebody, for not just 1 day. You know, some people, they don't want to really be inconvenienced with church. So they go to church 1 day. All right, I'll do my thing. I'm out the door. Gone. You get that? That's what happened back then. I'm only going to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover for one day. If I don't get back home, I don't make any money. If I don't have any money, there's no food on the table. So there's some people that would say, you know what? I'll be here for Passover, but I'm not going to be here for the unleavened bread. So what they would do is they would take off. Not Mary and Joseph. Mary and Joseph stayed for another 7 days. Every year. That takes some planning. That takes some coordination. That takes being with family. That means you're taking care. Now, how would you like to have like another 3, 4, 5 brothers or sisters and then having to make that journey? Can you imagine trying to take care of all those kids and try to keep track of all of them? And you'd be going, Jesus, you watch your little brother, you know, that type of thing. So then they're there for what? 8 days. And then they got to go home. What do you mean we got to leave? No, Jacob was there. I got to see. I don't want to go. You ever heard that one before? I've often wondered what it must have been like to raise Jesus as a little boy growing up. You know, we read the Bible, but I know there's not a lot of detail, but there's some things we know. Mary and Joseph were the kind of people that, you know, they modeled their faith. They modeled what they believe about God. Not only did they believe God, but then they were devout. And they would make that journey because they wanted their son to know exactly how to worship. The only way trailer will understand God is through you as his parent. He'll see God through your eyes. How you follow God will make all the difference in his life. Mary and Joseph were exactly the same way. Mary and Joseph, they followed after God. And you know what? That doesn't just start when all of a sudden you have this announcement that says you're going to have baby Jesus. It started far before that. Growing up as a little girl, as a little boy, modeled it with their parents. And I'm the grandparents, the great-grandparents. And I'm going, boy, talk about modeling. You as a parent, so many people, tell you what, I'm going to let you guys go sit back down. You're getting tired, I can tell. But before you go, I got one more thing to show you, okay? All right, and what I want you to do is I want you to stand here, and you stand behind him. Stand behind him. Okay? All right. No, I'll tell you what. On the count of 3, we walk forward. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, now stop. How fast can a man walk? Pretty quick. Pretty quick. Now come back. All right. Now let's say we're going to put mom in front. All right, mom, you're in front. You come behind her. Back up. Back up. Back up. Yo. Back up. Beep, beep, beep. There we go. All right, on the count of 3, go. Okay. A little bit easier, right? All right, come on back. All right, trailer, you're in front. All right, no, back up, back up. On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, go. Stop. you can only walk as fast as your kid will go. All right, you guys are out of here. Let me bring my point. Yeah, give me a hand. Good job. When he was 12 years old, they went to Jerusalem every year, the Feast of Passover. They went to Jerusalem according to the custom of the feast. Well, why celebrate Passover? Look at this next slide. One of the things that God says, I don't want you to ever forget this. I want you to remember this. Don't forget it. Don't stop thinking about it. God says, I want you to remember this. I want you to remember that I am your Redeemer. So God put into place, you can look it up in Numbers chapter 12. I think I have it in your... Let me see, do I have that? Yeah, there it is. God says, I want you to remember what I did for you, delivering you out of Egypt. I redeemed you out of Egypt. God says, don't forget. So he made three different holidays, if you will, as a custom to celebrate. All right. So we know what Passover is. Now, let's go one step further. A lot of people put their children, back up one slide. A lot of people put their children above everything else. You know, this past week I was thinking about like this whole issue with abortion. You saw the whole issue, you know, firing up with Roe v. Wade and all that type of stuff. And I'm sure there's all kinds of different opinions about it. Some people are going, yes, finally, you know. And I'm going, God, we need to stand up for the unborn, stand up for people that are dying. And God, life does start at conception. Not everybody agrees with that. Understand that. I know that right now in our country, they're worried today about whether or not people were going to be at church and disrupting everything going on. We care about our kids. We care about our grandkids. We care about our great-grandkids. And there's nothing wrong with that. If we make the mistake of what Israel did, then we do it to our own peril, and we do it to our own kids, to their peril. In Numbers, let me read to you this. This is what happens when the parents put their kids above God and his will. The parents, they're coming out of Egypt, and they're about ready to enter into the promised land. And it says, if only we had died in Egypt, if only we had died in the wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword? And listen to this. Why has he brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Goes on and it says, God says, your little ones, whom you said will be victims, I will bring them in. They will know the land which you despised. But as for you, your carcass will fall in this wilderness. Your sons shall be shepherds in the wilderness for 40 years, and bear the brunt of your infidelity until your carcasses are consumed in the wilderness. You know, God doesn't share his glory. And I know children are important. But nothing is as important in your life as your relationship to God. God receives the glory. God leads in your family, but your family does not have the right to replace God. You know, go to the next slide. When he talks about remember and don't forget that God is your Redeemer, God says, I want you to understand something. I'm the one that redeemed you. I'm the one that gave you life. I'm the one that gave you a hope. I'm the one that can meet all of your needs. Listen, you as a parent, as a grandparent, as a great-grandparent, for your children, you need to remember and don't forget that God is your salvation. Don't ever forget that. God says, I am your Redeemer. I'm the one that can carry you, deliver you, walk you through that, provide for you, protect you, pillars of fire, clouds of smoke, does it all. Tell me if there's anything that's too difficult for God to do. I'm going, listen, your faith is in God. Your faith is in God, not your progeny. Your faith is in God, not your family. Your faith is in God, and out of that faith is how you lead your family. Understand? And God says, you as a parent need to remember. Boy, we quickly forget, don't we? Mary and Joseph, they set out 4 days on this hike. And they go with a caravan. Now, back in the day, you had to be careful because there were robbers. There were looters. There were people that were not so good. They were kind of evil. And if you're walking, you're pretty vulnerable. They'd see you coming a long way away. They would know where to put a choke point. And so what would happen is they would be walking. Well, if you had the men out in front, they would get walking so far, so fast, that the women and children are lagging behind. And now they were vulnerable. Whereas if you put the woman in front, well, mom would take off. But if there was a problem, the guys were in the back, and the kids, they would be listening to mom. So what they did back then was they would take and they would walk as a caravan. They would have all the kids get together, and you know what it's like as a parent. You want to keep them in your line of sight, don't you? You don't want them straying off too far, right? And so they put them in this caravan. They put the children in front, then they put the women, and then they put the men. And that way, the men could see anything that was going on out in the hills. They could send out scouts. They could make sure that everything's going fine for those kids and for their wives. And they get to Jerusalem. Now they're in Jerusalem, and they're starting to celebrate Passover. You know what Passover is? Think of it through the eyes of Jesus. He comes with his dad, 5-year-old boy, 6-year-old boy. Comes to Jerusalem, see the family, and then dad says, let's go to the temple. And you can imagine, there's hundreds of thousands of people around. So you keep your little boy right there next to you. You stay with me, you don't move. And so they're going through, and, well, they had to find a lamb because they were going to celebrate Passover. So they had all these merchants running around. It said that on one night for Passover, the historians say there were 250,000 lambs that were slaughtered. And can you imagine what it must have been like for little Jesus as he's walking to Jerusalem with his dad? They're getting there, and they hear the bleating of the sheep. Now, Jesus knows what his destiny is. Got to remember, he's God, not just a little boy. God knows what's coming. And as they're getting closer in the stream, they're passing through the Kidron Valley, and the blood is starting to flow. All these lambs are being slaughtered. And he knows that he is going to be that lamb probably 20, 30 years later gets to Jerusalem, and he's with his dad, and there his dad buys this lamb. And on the lamb, given to the priest, and the priest would sacrifice it. He would take the blood from that lamb, and he would sprinkle it on the altar. Then he would give the lamb back to the family to take back what they were supposed to do to celebrate Passover. They had to eat the lamb its entirety in their own home. They could have family, they could have friends, but there was not be any leftovers. They were to eat it all, and they ate it by candlelight. Because when darkness came over the land, and God sent out his angel, when they celebrated Passover, they were to eat it candlelight. When the lamb was presented to the family at the table, the oldest boy was to ask one question. And you know what it's like when you give your son something special to do. And this little boy couldn't wait to do it. And I'm sure Jesus was like that. Now, can I ask it now? Little Jesus, he's sitting there at the table. Lamb is prepared. Candle is there. You know what the little boy would ask? And they've asked ever since in 2,000 years. Why is this night different than all other nights? That was the question. And the response gave the dad the opportunity to one more time in his family to tell his family about God's salvation and how God protected the nation Israel and how God delivered them from their enemies and how God redeemed them and brought them back and gave them a name and gave them this home and gave them this land, this promised land. And every year at Passover, job of the dad was to make sure that his son understood those things. Well, it says here that Jesus was 12. Why is that a big deal? You know what happens at 13? You ever heard of a bar mitzvah? Right? That might be Greek. I'm not sure. Anyhow, they would celebrate what we call a bar mitzvah. You know what a bar mitzvah means, right? I'm sure you know a little bit about it. They would have this huge shindig, if you will, and it was a dedication where a young man, age 13, would become the son of the law. That's what it means, bar mitzvah. See, a 13-year-old boy is now under the constraint of the law of God. That 13-year-old boy is now responsible before God for his actions. As important as his parents are, bar mitzvah, well, I don't know that they had bar mitzvah in Jesus' day. They celebrated it, but it wasn't until later that they codified it and did all that kind of stuff. But he's 12 years old. Why is that important? Little Jesus, the law required that a parent 2 years before bar mitzvah, 2 years, it was the responsibility of a dad, mom, make sure that that boy understood the law of the Lord and understood what Passover was and to understand what God had done. And they were to instruct that child specifically 2 years before that event. That's what they did with bar mitzvah. Now you can picture Jesus. 12 years old. He's in Jerusalem. They're celebrating the Passover. They're eating it by candlelight. Why is this night like no other night? Joseph would have recited exactly what had taken place. Got to remember, Joseph was righteous and devout. As they're sitting there eating their dinner, they're watching everything that's going on. See, parenting is more about taught than taught. If you want your children to understand the things of God, then you better be doing the things of God. If you want your kids to follow in the things of God, then you as a parent model that. Now, that doesn't mean that your child will always do what you want them to do. They grow up, don't they? They have a mind of their own. But you as a parent, look at this next slide. You as a parent have a responsibility to instruct your child. But at age 13, according to Jewish law, that is when they became a young man, and they were now known as the son of the law, and they were responsible for their own actions. Now, Proverbs talks about it this way. It says, a child is known by their own actions. Yeah, they are. They're held responsible. Remember Mary? She was 14. She was 13, 14. They wanted to stone her. Why? She was responsible. She was old enough. She understood. You know, they were there for 8 days. At the end of the day, end of that time, had to go home. Well, like I said, little 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old, they'd spend their time with mom and dad. But then they're in the front of the caravan. So they start walking. And as they're walking, they got a full day out. Full day. Then they realize, where's Jesus? Where'd he go? Next week, we're going to kind of finish the whole story, pull it all together, all the pieces of it. But for today, I think it's enough to understand just a couple of things. Number one, I think one of the things we've got to remember is that God turns around and says, I'm the first person in your life. You worship me. You are not to have anything else in your life that is greater than the relationship that I have with you. You know, whether you're a parent, whether you're single, whether you're a pastor, whether you're a leader, there is nothing more important than the relationship between you and God. You worship him. You follow him. Else flows out of that. Don't ever forget that. Second thing you need to remember, God saved you. Where were you when you met Jesus? You gave your life to Jesus. Remember that day you go, oh, you delivered me. You know what? He did. Thankful for that. But you praise him and you worship him for that. And you say, thanks, Lord. Now would you do the same for my family? You know, I think of Job. Job was a righteous man. But you know what? His kids, they didn't always do what Dad wanted them to do. You know what Dad did? Dad would sacrifice and pray to God on behalf of his kids. Dad still followed after God, even though his kids necessarily didn't. And just in case they did something wrong, for God and didn't realize it, that's why he would sacrifice. You know, there's nothing more precious to us than our kids. God says, don't be fooled. Don't let that relationship with your children be more than the relationship that you have with me. Number 2, raise your children in the fear and nurture of the Lord. You know, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in our culture. I know we got all things from the abortion and the CRT and the homosexuality, and it's all out there. And, you know, listen, God says he will bring all things under his. Don't be confused by the things that you see going around you. I don't have to fight. I don't have to argue. What I do have to do is just present the truth. You know, if they want to hear that, that's their choice. Don't, that's their choice too. You know, we all answer to God. But you know what? Don't get so worried. Don't get so fearful. Don't get so caught up in what you see going on in politics. Christianity, your belief in God, is so much greater. And that's why he says, greater is he that's in you than he that's in the world. So you know what? I know there's a lot. I know there's a lot, even this past week, of things going on. I know about the guns and all that type of stuff, and it's tragic. But I go, God, a Christian is one who knows where their destiny is going, where it lies, what's coming in the future. So you hold on to your faith. You don't give up your faith. Turn around, you believe God, trust him, and leave the results with him. Don't take revenge. Don't have to argue. That's why Paul says, as far as it's possible with you, live at peace with all men. I didn't know if anybody was going to show up today. I didn't know if we were going to have demonstrations. And I was thinking, if somebody was here, what would you say to them? How would you treat them? I guess the last thing that I want to leave with you. Some of you are parents. I want to speak directly to you today. Just a moment. Your children are going to make decisions in their life. Going to make their own decisions. They're going to do as they feel right in their conscience for what they believe. You may not agree with those decisions. Understand that. But today, I want you to understand every single person, including you, is responsible to God. Jesus, 12 years old, 13 years old. He knew who he was. He knew who his father was. He knew why he had come. That's next week. Every child is responsible for their action. Pray for them. Urge them. You model for them what faith looks like. But don't you buy into it. Give up your faith. Follow after Christ. Is right. What God requires of us. Okay? God, thank you for teaching us these things.